depression call it a big step forward. We'll have more on this story throughout the morning.
The White House is set to further separate the U.S. economy from China's with new limits on investing.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Viking. Exploring the world in comfort, Viking offers a small ship experience with cultural enrichment and destination-focused dining. More at Viking.com. And by C3 AI. C3 Generative AI provides ChatGPT enterprise search that is verifiable, secure, and accurate across all enterprise data. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI.
I'm David Brancaccia. The U.S. is planning to ban U.S. private equity and venture capital firms from investing in certain kinds of technology in China. The Biden administration could post an executive order this morning. Marketplace's Samantha Fields reports.
The ban is expected to apply to some investments in semiconductors, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. Companies that make other kinds of investments in tech in China will also be required to report them to the U.S. government. The goal with this order is to prevent China from developing cutting-edge military technology that could threaten U.S. national security. The move is part of a broader government effort to prevent American technology and money from helping China develop advanced weapons it could potentially use against the U.S. in the future. Last year, the Biden administration started restricting exports of advanced semiconductors and chip manufacturing equipment to China. The new rules are not expected to go into effect immediately. Instead, there will likely be a comment period before they're finalized. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
Consumers in the U.S. have over $1 trillion in credit card debt. First time ever. Laid end to end, that many dollar bills would stretch from Earth past the sun, 97 million miles. But perhaps more relevant, $1 trillion in American credit card debt is a new high, according to the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Among the drivers for this, inflation and confident 20-somethings. Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes has that.
There are more people with access to credit cards today than there have ever been before, and a lot of them are young.
Gen Z has come into its own as a credit-using generation.
Paul Siegfried is with the Credit Bureau TransUnion. He says Gen Zers, who range in age from about 18 to 28, are growing their credit card balances at a faster pace than any other generation. And with inflation, people of all ages may be relying on credit more, but young people are more confident they'll be able to pay it back.
They believe that their future income will allow them to pay off the money they borrowed today.
Still, money borrowed today is more expensive than money borrowed last year. And Heather Aiello of the National Association of Certified Credit Counselors says not all consumers realize that.
So the balances are growing not just because they're spending more, but based on the interest that they're paying.
Aiello says education's key to helping the next generation use credit cards wisely, and points out more states are requiring schools teach classes in personal finance. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
Stock markets are facing upward with Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures up between 2 and 0.3% now. Yesterday, Italy's conservative government surprised the country by applying a 40% one-time windfall tax on Italian bank profits, which have been lending at higher interest rates but not giving customers correspondingly better rates on savings. The bank stocks fell sharply, but today the Italian government backtracked, capping the windfall tax, and bank stocks in Italy are moving back up.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business. From small business to big enterprise and everything in between, Amazon Business helps simplify the supplies buying process. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by Bitwarden. Bitwarden helps enterprises and individuals securely manage passwords from websites to app logins. More at bitwarden.com. And by the Glassdoor app, where professionals share advice and talk about work and life anonymously. Conversations are happening within companies and in thousands of communities on the new Glassdoor app.
It may not be the wildest party of the season, with top economists rubbing shoulders with central bankers, but it sure is a sexy theme this year: structural shifts in the global economy. It's the annual symposium at beautiful Jackson Hole, Wyoming, convened by the Kansas City Federal Reserve later this month, and the gathering is attracting more diverse perspectives. The president of the Kansas City Fed, Esther George, plays a key role in that story. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer explains.
It was August of 2012. Esther George was the new president of the Kansas City Fed and hosting her first Jackson Hole Economic Policy Symposium. She looked out at the audience and saw a sea of mostly white male faces. She vowed to bring more women and people of color to Jackson Hole.
Being the hostess and looking out at that audience was probably the visual that I needed.
George organized a happy hour for the handful of women there.
And there were 5 of us around the table. We all fit in one table.
Diane Swank was one of those 5. She's now chief economist at the accounting firm KPMG.
Esther George gave us a seat at the table.
The happy hours became a tradition. As the women sipped huckleberry margaritas, George would ask them, who's not here who should be? At one point, someone said, hey, what about Lisa Cook and Susan Collins? This was before the 2 black economists were top Fed officials. Swank says Esther George asked Collins and Cook to moderate high-profile debates at Jackson Hole.
Controlling who gets to ask a question and when the questions come to an end. I mean, it's hard to be a moderator, believe me, in a room of economists and central bankers.
That moderating dramatically raised the profiles of Collins and Cook, and Esther George invited Cook to sit at her table at dinner, along with Fed Chair Jerome Powell. George says Cook impressed the top brass at the Fed, so
when her name came up, people saying, oh yeah, Lisa Cook, Jackson Hole, I remember her.
In 2022, at George's last Jackson Hole symposium before retiring, almost 30% of the audience was female, and more than 40% of the speakers were women, according to the Kansas City Fed. It doesn't record the race of attendees, but George says she did see more black and brown faces last year. Chris Brummer teaches financial regulation at Georgetown and tracks diversity at the Fed. He says a range of perspectives can result in better questions.
They're the kinds of questions that at least force people to think seriously about what are the downsides of any particular policy action.
Like if you hike interest rates to cool the economy, raising unemployment in the process, who's losing their jobs? And if you stimulate the economy, are you widening economic inequality? Brummer says diversity helps Fed officials realize they can create winners and losers with their decisions. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
Thanks, Nancy. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio. It's the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.